What's next? This is a question we're all having to ask and answer more frequently. I'm Jenny Blake, your host of the Pivot Podcast and author of Pivot, The Only Move That Matters Is Your Next One. For show notes from this episode, visit pivotmethod.com/podcast. If change is the only constant, then let's get better at it. Here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pivot Podcast. I am thrilled and humbled to have our guest, Erik Weihenmayer, here today. Erik is an adventurer, author, activist, and motivational speaker, and he has become a celebrated and accomplished athlete despite losing his vision at the age of 13. Erik was the first blind person to reach the summit of Mount Everest in 2001 and completed the 7 summits the following year, joining 150 mountaineers at the time who had accomplished that feat, but as the only climber who was blind. In 2005, Erik co-founded No Barriers, a nonprofit organization with the tagline, "What's within you is stronger than what is in your way." The organization helps others with diverse backgrounds and abilities attack challenges head-on, problem solve, build winning teams, and serve others. In September of 2014, Erik and blinded Navy veteran Lonnie Bedwell kayaked the entire 277 miles of the Grand Canyon, considered one of the most formidable whitewater venues in the world. That's the focus of his recent book, No Barriers, A Blind Man's Journey to Kayak the Grand Canyon. And in the foreword, Bob Woodruff said that Erik is simply one of the most remarkable men I have ever met. Erik, although we're just meeting through our mutual friend, Peyton Lindley, I have to say the same. Thank you so much for being who you are in the world.
Thank you very much. And also, I'm very excited or impressed that you pronounced my last name correctly. Nobody does that.
Well,
most people, it's like Weihenmayer, Weihenmayer, and I don't know. So saying Weihenmayer is like amazing.
I have to confess, I got lucky because I happened to stumble upon your website and I saw that you were on Oprah, which I didn't realize. So then I watched this. It's such a moving video. I don't know what year that was, but Oprah said it and I was like, oh my God, I didn't even think to ask how to pronounce his name.
Yeah, it's impossible.
When was that Oprah appearance?
I was probably back in like 2008 or something like that. There was a little kid that I met named Kyle, and he went blind in kindergarten from cancer, and he was pretty. Of course, you're devastated, even as a little boy. And I met him and talked to him and hung out with him, and we stayed in touch. And anyway, he turned out to be an amazing kid. He joined the climbing team in his school. He became the president of his student council. He just really has gone on to do great stuff. He's actually riding his tandem bike across America in a couple months. So anyway, so he and I were on Oprah, and he wrote me this letter in Braille. And of course, it was the perfect Oprah interview because I was bawling. And
oh my gosh, I know I was bawling. And he said when he was going blind, he thought blind people had to just stay home all day. And that you helped show him that you could go do things and be an adventurer and be an athlete. It was so moving. Yeah.
And a few years ago, he joined one of our No Barriers programs. And I actually trekked across the Andes for a week with Kyle and a bunch of people. So yeah, he's been a big part of my life since that interview.
That is so incredible. You helped so many people through No Barriers. This was one of the most inspiring set of stories from your book that you layer in not just your journey, this most recent one of kayaking the Grand Canyon, which is its own beast, but you work with so many people with differing levels of ability. And I'm wondering, how do you advise or guide people on this journey where in the beginning, they may feel hopeless? You work with a lot of military veterans. And how do you help get them past that blame, either of themselves or others, or the why me's, or the what ifs, who would they be without these adversities, physical and otherwise? How do you counsel others in this way?
Well, it's not an easy map that you're trying to help people build for themselves. Uh, and, I've been thinking about that question for a long time. People go off and they start with optimism and hope, and then things happen along the way. Sometimes those things, you either get stuck or you get shattered or you get just crushed, and so then how do you rebuild your life? How do you create a map that takes you from that dark place to the summit, whatever that looks like for each person? And that's really where No Barriers came out of it. It's, No Barriers isn't really about kayaking the Grand Canyon. It's really about that map. It's about, I just didn't understand it myself. I didn't feel that anyone had adequately illuminated what that map looked like, what that sort of unexplored terrain looked like between those dark places and those high points. And so I wanted to understand it better. So the last 15 years, I've been diving into it with veterans who have come home from war and are trying to put their lives back together, and youth, and people with physical challenges, people with psychological trauma, people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I guess there's no easy, I can't give you like a nutshell answer, but it's a long process. Basically, I think people have to have an idea that they are not living the best version of themselves. They're stuck, though. They don't know how to get there. And then No Barriers provides sort of the catalyst, a little bit of the energy to, hey, come do an expedition with us, do a program. We'll take you through a process, and slowly and surely we'll kind of reprogram the brain and our psyche and our and our spirit and our soul, and kind of equip ourselves for the journey. Because hey, you went out and you got hurt, right? But that doesn't mean you should check out. That doesn't mean you should be on the sidelines for the rest of your life listening to life go by. You got to get back in the current. And if you're properly equipped for that journey, then it can be an amazing adventure.
It seems like you help people through No Barriers, and this sense of adventure and possibility that people think, well, now life's over, on some level, or this life that I had dreamed about. And there's a lot of grief there, but you help show. And, one theme in the book is you're saying other people will often put up barriers unintentionally. Let's say for you losing your sight, where they just assume what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
And that you chose to shatter those barriers. Like you couldn't imagine a life where those things wouldn't be possible. And even you saw that, I'm forgetting his name in this moment, but the man running across Canada, that I would love for you to share with listeners how that was inspiring to you, because it seems like he served a very special role for you, showing what's possible. And then you've now shown that to so many people through your life and No Barriers.
Well, so I want to comment as well on something that you said, because I find it really interesting, is that you talked about people saying like they think their life is over. And sometimes when people get stuck or get hurt, yeah, they want their life back. And sometimes they achieve that. But honestly, sometimes that isn't happening. Maybe their old life actually is over and they have to start a new life. They have to kind of use the energy of that adversity, and kind of use it as a catapult, as kind of a catalyst to propel them in a new place. And that can be a freaking crazy ride for people. Mm-hmm. But it can launch them into some really amazing places. And, but sometimes it is like saying, hey, I'm giving up that thing I was hanging on to, and I'm going to sort of embrace something new. Now, Terry Fox, he is definitely one of my heroes. Terry was this guy that when I was going blind from this really rare disease, I was, 12 years old. I saw him on TV. There was a show back in the 80s called That's Incredible. And And I love the show.
I love the
And
name.
I couldn't see very well, but I could press my face up against the TV screen and I could sort of make out the images as I was losing the last traces of my eyesight. And they focused one night on this guy named Terry Fox. He was a Canadian. He had lost a leg to cancer, and he decided that he was going to run across Canada. Now, I love that because I was just like, whoa, wait, what? Like, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to kind of shrink into a ball and protect the little bit you have left. But Terry didn't do that. He did kind of the opposite of that. That thing that happened to him, that tragedy, that darkness, he converted it into something bigger, and he used it as energy, and it propelled him along that road. And as he ran across Canada, people began to show up and notice him. It was before social media, so it was just like telephones and stuff and newspapers that started latching onto this crazy guy with a prosthetic leg limping across Canada. And by halfway through his journey, running a marathon a day, there were hundreds, thousands of people showing up to cheer him along. He raised $1 for cancer research per every Canadian citizen. I think now his legacy has raised probably nearing $1 billion for cancer research. Just his name alone.
Wow.
And, that was so incredibly powerful and profound for me to think about, the idea that you don't have to react and respond the way that, that you're sort of trained to, that you can react in a totally different way, in a totally kind of unpredictable way, that you don't have to retreat, that you can attack, and that's going to create the kind of future and the kind of legacy and the kind of character that you hope in your life. But it's a pretty bold decision that he made.
Oh my gosh, completely. And look at the legacy now, as you said, almost $1 billion from that decision, not to just lay down and shrink, as you said.
Yeah, and he inspired a nation, and he's a folk hero now. He's a national hero in Canada. There's Terry Fox Day. There's Terry Fox runs all over the world. There's a statue of him in, I think, like Vancouver. So, yeah, I mean, he died eventually from cancer, but he lived bigger than he died. And, it's pretty cool.
There's something you said in there. It reminds me in the book, you talk about alchemy of turning pain into purpose and darkness into light. And that although most people wouldn't choose these various adversities, there is an opportunity, as you said, if you find the fight, you find the spark, that these stories are so inspiring. Like I was so moved reading your book, and it shifted me on a profound level. Just reading the book, not to mention interacting with you in person, and then that cascade effect. So it's not to make light of the incredibly difficult journey that anyone has to take. Like, for example, the veterans you described coming through PTSD or anything like that, but that your stories, the ones who do have this tremendous adversity ends up being so inspiring to millions of people, like Terry Fox, inspiring a nation to say, well, if he can do that, what can I do?
Yeah. And, so I had written, my second book was this book called The Adversity Advantage. And I teamed up with this scientist, Dr. Paul Stoltz, and he's an amazing guy. Like, really, he studies resiliency, and he studies, adversity and this idea of how to strengthen your approach to adversity. And he's a genius, and I learned a ton from him as we co-wrote this second book. But we used to get in these arm wrestling matches because, like, he was coming at adversity from like this clinical side, where it's like, the faster you pick yourself up and you respond effectively, positively to adversity, the better you're going to be, and in a dozen different ways, from like health to longevity to all these things. And that's 100% true. But I would say, like, Paul, it's not like you are walking down the street and you stub your toe and
Right.
There's blood like gushing everywhere, and you're like, what an opportunity for growth. No, it just doesn't work that way. Like, so this third book was, I wanted to go into the human side beyond anything clinical. I wanted to just understand people's journeys by looking, with a really clear lens at people's journeys. Yeah, I mean, all the people that I wrote about in No Barriers, they go through hell, and it's, getting shattered is not like something you ask for. But that process of rebuilding, that process of alchemy, is a really beautiful, inspiring process. But definitely, yeah, it's not like one person I studied, smashed their head against the wall and then got up and said, "Great, okay," they lay on the ground and they pound their fists against the ground and they rail against the unfairness of life. And yeah, eventually, once they've gone through the appropriate sort of mourning and all that stuff, they, that journey leads them to these amazing new discoveries. But it's because eventually they realize that they have to open their heart again, and they have to sort of move forward in that no barriers type of way.
Mm-hmm. It's so beautifully said. It reminds me this part in the book where you talked about, in fact, it's a good cue. I'm going to read this one part. You say, "As blood poured down my face and into my eye, I thought about the motivational poster Rob had spotted on the wall and wished it were that easy. No, I thought, barriers were not imagined or just perceived. They were real things with real substance, as real as a square iron bar across a tender forehead, and they hurt a lot. The cruelest part was trying to push forward, trying to navigate, fighting through one challenge after another, trying to learn these complex languages of the heart and mind, trying to build something important." And you describe how it's like you sometimes do go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and like these barriers are real. It would be fake or false for you to just go up, stand up on stage and tell everyone at No Barriers, like, no barriers, they're invisible. I love how you kind of kept it real throughout the book and shared all these examples.
Well, it's funny because people often say, "Okay, so your message is that barriers are only in the mind." I'm like, no, they're real. They're pretty real. And like, they're like, "Oh, and okay, so your message is like anything is possible." I'm like, no, I'm not driving a car. I'm not a NASCAR race car driver. So yeah, not everything is possible. So yeah, No Barriers has a realism to it. That these barriers are real. And that experience, I was walking with my dog. He didn't look up, and this iron bar was sticking out into space and totally whaled me in the head. And I was laying flat on my back with blood pouring down my eyes. And I was thinking, barriers are definitely not just in the mind. And so, yeah, there's a lot of struggle for people along the journey. There's more struggle, I would say, than there is triumph. But there is triumph. There's, those journeys are sprinkled with triumph and with self-discovery. And that makes it worth it in the end, and great adventure. So that's the common thread that I found with all these people, from Hugh Herr, that, lost both of his legs and became a world-class climber, to Mandy Harvey, who was a person who lost her hearing and became a world-class songwriter and musician. So yeah, there were common threads that ran throughout all these people. And I've been really privileged to meet these real people and be able to write about them. But again, like in a very realistic way, like I did not want to BS people. Mm-hmm. There's enough books that BS people and present this sort of rosy picture of struggle. And I just didn't want to do that. Like I just felt like, somebody should sort of state these things as hard as they are, as with all the blood and all the flailing and all the groping, and not in the Donald Trump groping kind of way, but in just the life way, and be real about it.
That's what I loved about the kayaking story, that really you kayaking the Grand Canyon, it is epic. But what's so interesting about you, and I think why Peyton said we gotta chat with you for this show is that I expected that you were just going to write a book about like, this is my journey of kayaking the Grand Canyon and describing all the rapids, which you and your co-author buddy do beautifully, what the experience was like. But you really zoomed out. It was so much more about the river as a metaphor for life, as a metaphor for overcoming adversity. And actually you shared a challenge that was very new for you. You'd been a climber for a long time. Like you said something like you felt as vulnerable as a child starting from scratch and you had a lot of fear. I actually thought it was beautiful how much you shared a journey that showed what kind of, I can't call them warts because you're incredible, but that showed like warts and all, bumps, bruises, flips upside down, feeling discouraged, wanting to quit, having the fear, and then still going forward and doing so with a team. Like that's the other thing. I think one of your huge messages is you're not saying no barriers, and you're also not saying you can do anything and go it alone. Like so much of your success, it seems, involves teams of people around you in various ways.
Yeah, I was terrified. I mean, when I was a climber, as you said, and, in a weird way.
Which climbing would terrify me more.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I'd been climbing for a long time and it was like climbing was becoming my comfort zone. And so starting kayaking at 40 years old, by the way, I was terrified. Like I was terrified to the point where I was sick, physically, like throwing up and just, not able to eat. And, but I wanted to understand, in a way it was weird because a lot of the soldiers come back, and take part in our No Barriers programs. And, some of the trauma that I had, I felt like a kindred spirit to some of those veterans. Not like I had ever been shot at or anything, but slamming into a rock without being able to see it in a massive rapid that just slams your face right into a rock and you flip over and your head's bashing against rocks underwater and you're trying to roll back up and you feel like you're going to drown. Like it was really overwhelming. And you're exactly right. One of the pieces of this No Barriers life is the kind of team that you're able to build, because you cannot do it alone. If you're going to do big things, you are not going to do it alone. You just don't have enough inside to be a lone wolf. So blindness sort of fleshes that out for me. I'm definitely not going to kayak a river or climb Everest alone. So I've become hopefully kind of an expert in building this amazing team around me of people who, when I'm down, when I'm crushed, they lift you up and they help you sort of figure out the map that still exists in front of you, even though you can't see it at the time.
Yeah, it was as much the success story, like testing different walkie-talkies, testing how you're going to communicate, testing just so many things. I loved reading about all your experimentation.
In fact, not to be kind of overdoing it, but I mean, that's another part of the No Barriers life, that because we point out a bunch of different things. We call them elements when we run our programs. And another one is we call pioneer. And it's like, yeah, if you're going to get back on this track, then you're going to have to innovate along the way. You're going to have to be kind of an engineer of your own life. And blind people get really good at doing that, being able to understand how big a room is by echoes. You're not seeing a thing, so you have to click and listen to the echo. It's blind people call it echolocation. How you're going to match your clothes and how you're going to figure things out. And technology, type on a computer. You're constantly forced to try to be a pioneer, and it's just a struggle, like, for sure. I mean, I'm not always a good pioneer. Sometimes I'm the one on my stomach pounding my fists, just so angry and, upset. But anyway, ultimately you gotta sort of pioneer things. And I love the stories of our people that have gone through our programs. Like we had this veteran who had one leg blown off, and that was his good leg, because his other foot was, they saved it, but it was it was really bad. He could barely stand on it. And he wanted to climb a mountain with us. We climbed a 20,000 foot peak called Lobuche. And, he was trying to suck it up and just be tough. Like, I can do it. I'm a soldier. I'll just, push back the pain. And we realized very quickly that wasn't going to happen. No amount of sucking it up was going to work for this guy. And so we started looking around. One of our partners in No Barriers was this cool company called Side Sticks, and they made these really innovative sort of support crutches. And they had different attachments for snow and ice, and so we hooked him up with this thing. He used these side sticks. He climbed the mountain. He would have never gotten there without sort of embracing that tool. And so that's really inspiring to me, because how many tools are there in front of people and they just blow them off because of their ego, or because they don't have time, or they haven't really taken the time to be a discerning person, looking and understanding their environment.
Totally. And it seems like what you just described, that being a pioneer, dropping ego, being willing to use the tools at one's disposal, and then patience, probably, to just try and fail. Right. And this co-interdependence, you would probably say, not codependence.
Yeah. Sometimes a little codependence.
Yeah, but like, speaking of technology, I thought it was fascinating hearing about your experimentation with echolocation. And I mean, it's wild. I love even to hear where you're at with that now. And then Brainport, this technology, I don't know if you're still using it, but where you have a device on your tongue and you can feel the shapes of things in front of you. Like, say more about either or both, or whatever is your latest pioneering experiments have taken you.
Well, I've been fortunate to be able to connect with amazing people. So like, I wanted to learn echolocation. So I connected with this pioneer. He's a blind guy named Daniel Kish. And I wrote about him in No Barriers. And, when he was a kid, nobody gave him a cane. So he had to sort of figure out his environment. The only way he could do it was to learn to click. And he does this really cool kind of, he calls it's like a bat interrogating his environment. And he's listening for the echoes, sound being vibration, bouncing off of objects and coming back at you. So he can tell, a cup in front of him. He can, he can ride a bike down the street and click, and he can say, yeah, there's a building on the left and there's a gargoyle on the right. You're like, well, come on, dude. Are you cheating or something? He taught a kid, and there's a YouTube video of him playing ping pong using echolocation. I'm like, so I don't have the skills to that degree. That's a phenom. But Daniel came out and taught me, how to do all kinds of things in my community that I couldn't do before, like find the way to my backyard across a creek, and, by clicking and hearing the trees and counting the number of trees along the way, and then being able to take a left and up to my backyard. I mean, it was just so fun to be able to, find ways of breaking through barriers in my backyard with Daniel. And he's come on to be a part of our No Barriers community and teach a lot of clinics for us. He'll blindfold a bunch of people and have them navigate with their ears. Now Brainport is, all these innovations are sort of a similar vein, because Brainport is based on this idea of neuroplasticity. And it's really, as I wrote the book, I realized that No Barriers is really based on reprogramming the brain. The idea that when one thing happens, one barrier happens in the brain because of trauma, or because of because one part gets damaged, that you can create new neural pathways through. And the other parts of the brain can kind of rewire itself to do that job. And so Brainport is essentially a device that you wear a camera. It's a video image that it's taking, and that video image gets translated through a microprocessor. And that light image is translated to a tactile image that is like on a plate on my tongue. It has like 400 or 500 what are called tactors, these little vibrating pixels. The eyes get, 10 million pixels, but this just gets 400 or 500. So I'm just getting the shapes of things. And I can use it to see holds on a rock face. I can see it to best is playing games with my kids. I can play tic-tac-toe or card games.
You can
Rock,
play
paper,
card
scissors is really
games?
fun.
Do the
Yeah, you
cards, are
can
they
zoom it
special
in.
cards? Or you
No, no,
can,
just regular
what?
cards. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah, in fact,
goodness.
that's pretty easy because you can see the two or the three or the king. It contrasts against
Mm.
the lighter dark behind it. So that's actually really easy. And fists are really fun. Hands, fists, scissors. When you're playing rock paper scissors, because I can zoom in and I can
Oh
look
my
and see the difference. And that is as close to sight as I will get
mm.
in my life because both my eyes. I've lost both my eyes, and there's no technology. There's no cure to my blindness. So, ideas or technologies like BrainPort are going to be the sort of the future for a lot of blind people. Kind of a technological solution to being able to see the world in a different way.
Mm.
And so this guy, Dr. Paul Baccarita, who is a pioneer in neuroplasticity, he decided that, hey, if your eyes don't work, then let's create a new portal into the brain because it's the brain that sees, not the eyes. The eyes are just the hardware. The brain is the true thing that actually is seeing. And so when I am using the brain port, my brain is lighting up with images, like when I could see. So yeah, I know the visual cortex of my brain is lighting up because I'm seeing in my brain.
It's amazing. I love the innovation, the creativity of someone to for him to just make that connection that, hey, it's really our brains that are perceiving images. And what's another part of the body that has all these transmitters? The tongue.
Yeah. And the tongue he
Wow.
found was the most receptive thing. He
So
tried the
wild.
back, he tried the feet, he tried all the stuff, and he finally found the tongue was the thing that has the most packed with like sensors, for taste. Uh, and as I wrote the book, I also realized that all these connections in this, and Mandy Harvey is a person I wrote about. She's become a friend and just somebody I really look up to. She went deaf in her music program in college. And then eventually,
Which
long
is such a
story
cruel
short,
irony, by the way, isn't it? Or not a cruel irony. Sometimes I think life gives this perfectly weird twist, but it's like she's a music student.
yeah, she wanted to
You
be a
know,
music teacher.
that's
And
so
yeah, and she
wild.
goes deaf in music school. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, what I described in the book was like, I used to be a fan of Monty Python Flying Circus. That was this really hilarious show back in the 70s. And, this sort of just in the beginning of the show, it was so odd. This sort of cartoon foot comes out of the sky and just crushes this little Swiss
Mm.
village. And it's like, yeah, that's what it was. Sometimes you make your own problems, right? A lot of times that's the case. We're actually doing things that are creating our own misfortune. But when in certain instances, like Mandy's case, it's just the cosmic foot just coming down and
Right.
crushing her life out of the blue. So she gave up singing, and her dad got her back into it and said, "Hey, let's just sing a little bit, and I'll play the guitar, and we'll sing like old times to connect." And she realized that she had perfect pitch, that sound, that hearing was in the brain,
Mm.
that the ears, like the eyes, they're not the thing that hears. The ears are the hardware. The brain is what hears. So she had a very similar experience, understanding that music was in her mind, in her brain, and she had to figure out how to get it out there. And so she developed all these amazing techniques where she sings barefoot, and she feels the vibration of the music, the other instruments through the stage. And she
Wow.
uses an iPhone, I think, when she sings, she has like a couple notes, like kind of in her brain that she knows. And she starts with that. And then she starts working her way through learning a new song by watching the iPhone. Like it's like a pitch kind of thing that tells her whether she's on pitch or not. And it's light, a certain color, I guess, lights up.
Oh,
I'm not a big
wow.
musical person, because I could be describing that a little bit off. But anyway, so she uses technology to get the right notes, And then she learns new songs. And now she's started writing her own music. So she's writing music that she will never hear and singing it, presenting it to the world. It's stuff that you would think is like, like fiction.
Right, right. And this to me is the no barriers. It's not that there are no real obstacles in the path. It's that what we perceive as barriers are often not the case. Or and how can I say that? It's like, of course, as you described, sometimes you actually get hit in the head with a metal rod,
Yeah.
But I think the barriers that you work so hard at dismantling and helping others dismantle are the perceived. Like, well, if I lose my hearing, I can never sing again. And she is this beautiful example of not just leveraging technology and these pioneers as you've described, but figuring out, oh, wait a second, that's an easy assumption to make, but it's not actually true.
Now, she found her way back to hearing, but in other cases, I actually, like one of the guys I wrote about was this guy named Andy Parkin. He's an amazing guy. He was an amazing climber. And he got like the highest climbing award that you can get in the world for pioneering a new route in Patagonia. And then he was guiding and a huge rock fell and crushed him and just destroyed him, just broke like every bone in his body and, just did awful things to his body. And he said, I want to climb again, but I don't really know if I'll ever be able to do it. And he would wheel his wheelchair to the window of the hospital and he would look out at the mountains and he just was so bored. He started painting, which is something he did a little bit when he was a kid. And then when he recovered enough, he hobbled his way, to the base of mountains and he would paint them because he thought that's as close as I'll ever get. And by doing that, yes, he rehabbed himself and he climbs still. He climbs better than he ever thought he would have. But more important than that, he became an artist. So that alchemy process doesn't always lead you exactly to the same spot that you left and you wanted to get back to. Sometimes it leads you to a new place. And so he is a famous artist now. He has a studio in Chamonix. He's like critically reviewed or, praised by critics. They talk about his paintings and his sculpture being sort of very no barriers-esque, like kind of showing a map to where people want to go in their lives and, really expressing not like pounding your chest on the top of mountains, but sort of the fragility of life. And so he's a famous artist and he's in great demand and, he's hired to like do monuments and things like that all over Europe. And, he calls himself an artist climber.
Oh, wow. Love it.
Yeah.
How's that for a slash career? That was awesome.
Yeah.
I thought you put it so beautifully earlier when you said sometimes they are starting a new life. There may be barriers to living the exact life that you would have had before all of these injuries. That life may be gone, but there's a new one here.
Yeah.
And in his case, and it's so beautiful. And I just love hearing his story.
Well, Hugh Herr is another guy that I've gotten to climb with, and he was one of the co-founders of No Barriers, the organization. And he lost his legs in the mountains, and he wanted to climb again. He was kind of a tinkerer. He was never much of a student, but he was like a tinkerer. He liked engineering. So he went in his garage and he built these legs that, enabled him to climb again. And he kind of had to give up his notions of what human legs look like and, what prosthetic legs were supposed to look like. He just kind of built these legs that are very functional for climbing. And through that iterative process became a way better climber than he ever was when he had legs. I mean, he could wedge his feet, his, man-made feet into seams on the rock that no human foot could stand in. And then by doing that, he got inspired, right? Creates an energy and a confidence. And then he decided, well, maybe I should go back to school. And he worked his way through his PhD program in bioengineering. And now he runs the biomechatronics laboratory at MIT. They build the most sophisticated prosthetic legs in the world. They're $64 million legs, with computer
Wow.
microprocessors that think like 1,000 times a
Oh
second,
my
you
gosh.
know, and it's just incredible the stuff he's doing. And he would never be delivering that technology to the world without having gone through uh, that journey
Right.
himself.
Right. I love the story of you guys doing a climb together with Hugh and Mark. And you said we were missing legs, we were missing eyes, we were missing all of these things, but together the three of you made it.
Yeah, I did a climb with Hugh, in this really cool tower. It's one of the Fisher Towers called Ancient Art, and we were an all quote unquote gimp climb. We had Hugh, who's double leg amputee, me, who's blind, and Mark Wellman, who's a paraplegic. I got to carry Mark a couple miles down the trail.
This
I
epic.
was in my 20s back then. I could carry a 160-pound man on my back, but um, and then we climbed this tower together, and for me, that was really kind of the conceptual beginning of No Barriers.
Right, because you did it and you did it on your own between the three of you, but no one of you could have done it by yourself.
Yeah, and that was, and that experience gave me more questions, I guess, at that time than answers. I mean, one, I wanted to understand, as I said, what that map looked like, and like, for instance, Mark does these pull-ups up the rock face. He invented this pull-up bar that locks onto the rope, and he pulls himself up and he slides up the rope on an ascender that's connected to the rope, and then he pushes this pull-up bar up and it locks off with like these teeth on the rope. So he's essentially doing pull-ups up the rock face, and he's like scraping and grinding his way up the rock face, and there's blood and like dirt falling in his face, and it's this really herky jerky process, like he'd be pulling up and like he wouldn't be making any ground, and he would look down and his foot that he couldn't feel was stuck in a crack, and he would have to like awkwardly reach down and free his foot that's just like stuck in there. And I thought, that's not a movie. Like, that's not the way they portray this in a movie. This is a grittier, um, a grittier journey that I really want to illuminate, and I want to understand what that gritty thing looks like. And then the second thing, you're right, was this idea that we weren't going to do this alone. And I thought, okay, so let's build something together where we all come together and we lean into each other, and we say, hey, we'll one, educate and inspire each other, and we'll lift each other up. We'll elevate each other to break through all these barriers in the world. I don't think we're going to do it just as blind people or amputees or people with PTSD or kids who experience poverty. Like, we're not going to do it if we just isolate ourselves and say, only blindness, right? That's not going to
Right.
work. It's too specific. So what we have to do, is the idea of No Barriers, is lean in and really come together and get stronger as this really big, diverse community, with this No Barriers life being a thread that runs through the community like glue.
One thing you said about kayaking the Grand Canyon, that is, if you deciphered the river carefully, you could discover a hidden map through the chaos. And these are such themes from the Grand Canyon experience of the relationship between control and letting go, the relationship to fear, the relationship to chaos. Now that you're a couple years out, looking back, how has that experience transformed you as you look ahead?
Well, I think, as we go through our lives, it's really easy to build up a lot of crust, like to just kind of build up a lot of armor that sort of protects you from all the chaos and all the challenge of the world. And I think for me, an experience like the Grand Canyon, going through all these rapids and sort of being able to square off with them and face them and move through them and understand that I wasn't like the biggest thing there. I wasn't the most powerful thing there. I was like this little wimpy human being. And a lot of kayaking is, yeah, of course, being proactive and making very clear, defined movements, but then it's sort of letting go and riding the energy of those rapids and getting through some of those rapids. They were so big and you kind of squeak this line through. Afterwards, I remember just feeling like that armor, that protective armor had just been ripped away. And I felt very similar to what I imagined maybe Terry Fox feeling like, running across Canada, just that light, that whatever that is. You can call it the soul, you can call it the human spirit, you can call it whatever you want, but that real sort of thing inside growing and connecting with this beautiful place in the Grand Canyon, connecting with all these people, like Mandy and Hugh and Mark Wellman, these people that I wrote about and in my life, and just feeling a sense of that light sort of connecting to something bigger than me. And so that's something that I hang on, and it sort of there's no way to say it in any other way except it sort of borders on spirituality. And I know that it's out there and that I can find it. When I go through the process, that sort of truly authentic process of no barriers.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, it's just so powerful. As I was looking at the pictures at the back of the book, I almost was crying, like every single photo, just looking at every picture of the journey along the way. I was on the subway too, by the way, and just like, I could barely keep it in just to see how much power and heart and soul and hustle and spirit and light, as you said, like to connect into something so vast. And
the gratitude for my team. My friends who linked their fates to me, and Harlan Taney, who was my guide through the Grand Canyon and guided me through his home. I mean, essentially the Grand Canyon was his home. He loved this place, and it was like, his place. And he guided me through it to my home, back to my family. And so just this amazing gratitude for these people. My friend Rob Raker, who taught me how to kayak and guided me through the process, was like the engineer behind all the problem solving. And he got cancer, stage 4 prostate cancer that he's still profoundly struggling with halfway through the training. And he decided to stick with it and see it through. His time is finite, and so, for him to give me that gift was like, the thing I realized that kept me going many times, because I was like, I'm not going to let this guy down, and he believes in me. I'm going to aspire to the person that this guy believes in.
Yeah. He and Harlan just seem like such epic guys, like just such superheroes, like of their own, like just the most.
I think of them for sure as superheroes. Yeah.
And your wife, Ellie.
Yeah, she's another superhero.
Tell me this: how does your wife? You're risking your life. You're doing these grand adventures. How does she keep her wits about her and not worry about you? Because she's not even the one in the kayak.
Well, she's got to be tough. She's a tough lady, and so she's gotten used to this over the years. She knows that I'm not a crazy blind guy, that I'm just like throwing my life away, that I'm not just taking massive risks and hoping to live through it. That there is an equation, there is a sort of an approach to, with redundancy and a great team and all the stuff that we've been talking about. So she trusts me. But yeah, no matter what, it's still a hard life. It's still a hard life for your family. We get really good quality time together. Like, we're all going to go to Nepal this summer. Arjun, he has a Nepali mom. He's from Nepal. That's another big piece of the book.
Yeah.
And he's going to meet his mom this summer. And we're going to go trekking in Mustang on a No Barriers youth expedition. And so, my family gets to have some pretty awesome adventures as a result of these decisions.
Absolutely.
They get some perks.
Oh, yeah, big time. And that's so exciting that the Nepal visit is coming this summer.
Yeah, he said when he's 16, he wants to meet with his Nepali mom, and he's going to be 16, and he's scared, but but he's going to do it.
Yeah, but he has the number one dad for inspiration. So,
Yeah.
Okay, two questions to wrap up. Because you lost your sight at such a young age, what would you say now? What's your superpower these days?
Well, I guess maybe my superpower is just insight, right? Experience. Like when I climbed Everest, when I finished that climb, I thought, well, maybe, it's like your darkest recesses of your brain are like, maybe it's just a fluke. Like maybe I just got super lucky. Maybe this is something you aspire to and you never repeat, right? And then it's just sort of like, after that, it's trying to refine, that Everest. And so those are your fears, and PV, who was our team leader on Everest, amazing team leader, he said, don't let Everest be the greatest thing you ever do. And so that embarked on this adventure, growing no barriers, adopting my son from Nepal, kayaking the Grand Canyon. And it made me understand that this isn't a fluke in our lives, that if we kind of embrace these ideas and I keep calling it a map, even though it's a messy map, and the sort of waypoints along the way, if we kind of understand what those are supposed to look like, we can continue to keep moving forward in these really incredible ways for as long as we want to do it. And so just kind of understanding that sort of rough equation, I think, has been a huge strength in my life.
I love the messy map.
Yeah.
Just by sharing your insights and your experience. And as you said, your goal for No Barriers, the book of keeping it real and the messiness of the map, but there's still something there. And you're still
the map that slams you into a wall sometimes, but
into a wall, underwater. And so,
but yet it also launches you to some pretty amazing places, like my son.
Oh my gosh. And that's such an incredible story and thread of the book as well. Erik, if you could encourage listeners to do just one thing when they stop listening to this, what would it be? Including attending the No Barriers Summit in October, which I'll have you tell them about that too.
I think it's just, maybe it comes down to this, and this was not me, this was a soldier, one of our soldiers that told me this. He said, to kind of live this life that we're talking about, it kind of takes courage, but not like Rambo courage or like this heroic courage. It's just courage to wake up each day and not let yourself be jaded, not let yourself, kind of stray away from who you wish to be. But just making little decisions, every day that sort of lead you in the right direction. Just making little, like even insignificant decisions of courage every day. And they lead you down a path, down that map, down that river. But it really does take just lots and lots of little moments of making courageous decisions that then add up to big directions in our lives. So I think people can break it down into something very concrete. Just think about every decision. Is that decision going to stop you in your tracks or lead you to a dead end? Or is it going to propel you forward in that sort of crazy spiraling way?
So beautifully said. So beautiful. Thank you so much, Erik. You really, you're one of these guests I have where I'm just speechless to even say thank you and just
awesome.
for being who you are and your incredible work, the books, the documentaries. And please tell everybody about where they can get involved with No Barriers this year if they would like to.
Well, we have programs for veterans, for youth, for kids, for people with physical and psychological trauma. And so definitely learn about No Barriers, nobarriersusa.org. And then we have an annual summit. It's our big signature event where we bring all our community together, and we don't exclude anyone, right? I mean, you don't have to be blind to be a part of this community. You can just be a regular mom or dad with a family and you want to live in this way. But we have this big event. We call it our summit. We have it in a different beautiful place every year. But this year we decided to go to the Big Apple. We decided to kind of get into the epicenter of thought and culture, media. And so we are having our big No Barriers Summit with probably 4,000 or 5,000 people in October 4th and 5th in Manhattan. So please join us. Be a part of it. We'll have our first day will be on the Intrepid with all these amazing speakers and activities and technologies that celebrate this No Barriers life. And then we'll end it the next day with a No Barriers adventure that's going to be really exciting. And then a big concert. We're calling it No Barriers Live in Central Park with amazing speakers and entertainers that will be sort of reflecting of this No Barrier spirit.
It sounds incredible. I really can't wait. I hope to see you there.
Yeah, I'll see you there. I'll see you there.
And I'll put all the links in the show notes. Erik, again, thank you so much for being who you are and doing the work that you do in the world.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Pivot Podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode or my insider tips and templates by signing up for Pivot List, a curated twice-monthly newsletter where I share the inside scoop on what I'm reading, watching, listening to, and the latest tools I'm geeking out on. Sign up at pivotmethod.com/pivotlist. Get show notes from this episode at pivotmethod.com/podcast and connect with me on Twitter at Jenny_Blake. Remember, build first, then your courage will follow. Hasn't it always?